Thank you for joining us. Sorry we're a little late getting the stream going, but I had to reset our modem coming into the house 2 times before I could get enough uh, internet connection to even run the camera. So I will definitely be making a call to our internet service provider after this to let them know my feelings on that. Uh, Hopefully you're able to follow us along on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, or Twitch, and that is due to Restream.io. So thank you to Restream for allowing us to stream to all kinds of different platforms at the same time. This is Scriptural Salvation Baptist Tabernacle. My name is Andy. Welcome to the living room. Joining me today, sitting down right in front of me, we have Paul and Richard. Mr. Steve to my left. To my right, on camera immediately is Grace. Anna's off camera. Jacob's off camera. My wife Liz is off camera. Baby Leah is off camera. And Sweetheart Doggy is off camera. We're going to go ahead and get started with a song called Take Me In. Now, this has to do with the ancient tabernacle that the Israelites built in the desert. Tabernacle being the portable worship center that the Israelites had on their way back to the Promised Land after they left Egypt. So that's what this song is talking about. So without further ado, take me in. All right. sing your praise. A hunger and thirst for your righteousness, and it's only found in one place. Take me into the holy of holies. Take me in by the road of the Lamb. Take me into the holy of holies. Take the Lord, 'cause I am still here. I am. Okay. We're going to continue on our lesson in Genesis, and we're almost near the end, where that song will actually make sense when we get into the book of Exodus. But this week being the last Monday of the month, we will be having communion. So without further ado, let's get it started.
Yep. Let's get it started.
Sounds like a song, yeah? Need that cursor up here. There. So I can see it. Perfect. Okay. We'll be reading through Psalm number 36, starting with Richard.
Transgression speaks to the wicked deep in his heart. There is no fear of God before his eyes, for he flatters himself in his own eyes that his iniquity
Yeah, it's a tough. Yeah, iniquity. Pretty good.
cannot be found and out and hated.
So what that's saying is that the wicked person has sin deep in his heart. He doesn't fear God, and he tells himself that he's good and that he makes up what is good and bad, and what is sin and what is not.
Oh.
The words of his mouth are trouble and deceit. He has ceased to act wisely and do good. He plots trouble while on his bed. He sets himself in a way that is not good. He does not take heed.
So continuing on with a person that is an evil person.
Your
Steadfast.
steadfast love, O Lord,
Extends
to the heavens.
We've had this word before, Paul. Faithfulness.
To the clouds. Your righteousness
Yep.
is like the mountains of God. Your
Judgments
are like the great deep and best you save, O Lord.
man and beast, you say.
Oh.
So we go from the evil person that only thinks about evil and in his mind makes up what he thinks is good, to the Lord is faithful above everything, and his judgments help save man and beast. So evil person is evil because he thinks himself evil, and God can save everyone. How precious is your steadfast love, O God! The children of mankind take refuge in the shadow of your wings. They feast on the abundance of your house, and you give them drink from the river of your delights.
For with you
Is the fountain.
you is the fountains of life, and your light to be seen light. O country
Continue.
of deep, your steadfast love to those who know you, and your righteousness to the upright. Let not the foot of arrogance come upon you, nor the hand of the wicked threaten you with. Their evil doers lie fallen. They are pressed down, unable to move back.
Very good. And now we will partake in communion. For I received from the Lord what I also delivered to you, that the Lord Jesus on the night when he was betrayed took bread. All right, so breaking the bread, Open. Don't eat that yet.
I was about to say that.
Open.
It looks like a pizza.
Okay. Yep. You can use these for pizza. That's what's up.
Yeah. We can make.
Here's my flat one.
Yeah.
And when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And that's when we get the bite. A lot better than that.
Does it have garlic in it? It's hard. Yeah.
No, they're all hard because remember I had to stop. I was doing the reset the internet 3 times before we work. That's not the point. Take it out and sitting for a while. And if you
Not hard
take
for
it
me.
right when it was hot, it wouldn't be hard. In the same way, also, he took the cup after supper. Cup? Oh, my baby.
I see baby eyes. I think the baby wants some.
No.
Are you gonna tell the brand of that?
It's gonna be.
No, kind of settled on. It is North Country Red by Thousand Islands Winery.
Why do they pour so much?
Sugar. I'm on camera. You don't like it. Children. This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. So, as always, I remind you every month that the body of Christ that was broken when he went to the cross is why we take the bread and we break it. When we eat the broken bread, we're supposed to remember that Christ died on the cross for us. And when we drink the wine or grape juice, we're supposed to remember the blood that he spilled for us while he was on the cross. So as a total reminder, communion is just a short little piece to remind us about Christ's sacrifice for us on the cross. Okay. Okay. And this comes to us from 1 Corinthians 11, 23 through 26. Why he did that? That is strange. Okay.
Well, hold on.
All right. We're going to start our lesson 33 in Genesis chapter 46, verses 1 through 7.
Genesis 46. So Israel took his journey with all that he had, and came to Beersheba, and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And God spoke to Israel in visions of the night, and said, Jacob. Jacob said, Here am I. Then he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again. And your hand shall close your eyes. Then Jacob set out from Beersheba. The sons of Israel carried Jacob their father, their little ones, and their wives in the wagons that Pharaoh had sent to carry him. They also took their livestock and their goods, which they had gained in the land of Canaan, and came into Egypt. Jacob and all his offspring with him, his sons and his sons' sons with him, his daughters and his sons' daughters, all his offspring, he brought with him into Egypt.
Richard, I wasn't supposed to do that.
Hey,
Want me to hit the button again?
If you can.
Sure thing, Dad.
I'm supposed to do this. All right.
Ah. It doesn't feel like 17 minutes.
Because it isn't. Remember, it took me a while to. So Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba. So Israel, being Jacob, the patriarch, left Canaan, the promised land, with all that he had, and came to Beersheba. Now, Beersheba is the southernmost city in all of Israel, so it's the border. So he was on his way, he had left, and he stopped in the last city along the way. And Beersheba, I'll show you on this map,
Is the last one?
is the last. So they used to be able to measure the extent of Israelite territory. They would call it from Dan, the northernmost city, to Beersheba, the southernmost city. And what's interesting about Beersheba is you take a line from the end of the Dead Sea and go straight across. That's where Beersheba is. So he was here. Beersheba. If you look, you see Bethlehem and Jerusalem. Bethel is another city that's been mentioned a few times. But here he is in Beersheba. And this is a city that when Isaac was there, he was quarreling with the Philistines about wells that he had built. Now remember we said that Isaac was the patriarch that went through in every well that he drilled in the desert, and he was the well driller, and that's what Isaac did. And he had a bunch of quarrels with the Philistines because they kept saying that the wells were in their territory, so they should belong to him. But he ultimately made a truce with them and said, you know what, all these wells that I drilled, you say are yours, you can have them, just let me have this one. And he made one last one. It was the biggest one, and kept it. And he built an altar there to worship God. And he also, like I said, the final well was built there in Beersheba. So in the city of Beersheba, the southernmost city, is a city that was familiar to Isaac, the father of Jacob. Jacob left Beersheba when he left Beersheba for Haran. He had the dream of Jacob's ladder at Bethel. So Beersheba was a city that was familiar to Jacob. He had lived there with his brother and with his mother, and they all quarreled there. They were all trying to deceive each other. And he left and he was headed for Haran. And he had his dream of Jacob's ladder where the angels were climbing and descending down to earth. And God spoke to Israel in visions of the night. So he had a dream of Jacob's ladder at Bethel. So here in Beersheba, while he's waiting to leave Israel and cross down into Egypt, God sends him another dream and communicates with him. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt. We start to get the idea that he's afraid to leave the promised land and go down to Egypt, and it's for various reasons. So I call this his assurance that he's allowed to leave. When Abraham and Isaac both went down to Egypt, they got into a lying match about their wives being their sisters. Isaac went back and never left the promised land. So in Jacob's mind, anytime he's left the promised land or anybody goes into Egypt, bad things happen. So God is here giving him reassurance. Go ahead and go. It's okay. There I will make you into a great nation. It's been hinted at before that Egypt, being turned into what it is right now by Joseph, it becomes the right place at the right time for the Hebrew nation to go into, be separate from all of the Egyptians and all the other people in the area, and to grow and to build in numbers so that they can become the promised people. God travels with Jacob. He offers to travel with him on his way down to offer him guidance and protection. And this is once again reassurance. Don't worry, I'm going to go down there with you. You're not going to leave you there by yourself. You're going to have me. This is a one-way trip. Jacob is supposed to box up everything that he has and take it with him. He's not supposed to leave anything behind because they're not supposed to want to go back. Right place, right time. There's no food. There's no way of living in Canaan at the time. And if the Israelites stay in the promised land, they're just going to mix into the people that live there and disappear as a promised people. So going down to Egypt to live, to get through the famine, to have their own land where the Egyptians segregate themselves with them is the right place at the right time. And we're going to skip a bit here because we listen to 1 through 7. Verses 8 through 25, I believe. Yeah, verses 8 through 25 of Genesis 46 are all names. They're Hezir, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, but it lists all of their descendants and everybody, all the men that are coming with them in the promised land. Is that important to our story? No.
No.
Not one bit. Plus, there's a bunch of goofy names like we've seen before. So I'm just going to skip past, and we will go to 3:20.
Yep. How about that? Stop.
born, and Ephrathah, sons of Rachel, through Jacob, and through Jacob, 7 persons in all. All the persons belonging to Jacob who came into Egypt, who were his own descendants, not including Jacob's sons' wives, were 66 persons in all. And the sons of Joseph, who were born to him in Egypt, were 2. All the persons of the house of Jacob who came into Egypt was 70.
Oh my gosh.
Kind of unnecessary. Okay. So like I said, verses 8 through 25 of this chapter are all just naming the males of the household and all their descendants. And this is so that future Israelites have a way to track their lineage. And it's a way for us later on to kind of give us an idea of time frames and things. So the Israelites were very good record keepers, but it makes for very boring reading. There were 66 people in all, so 66 males of the household that left the promised land and came down into Egypt. And then there was Jacob himself, Joseph, and Joseph's 2 sons, which made 70 Israelite males total who were going down into Egypt. We'll listen to verses 28 through 34.
He had sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to show the way before him in Goshen, and they came into the land of Goshen. Then Joseph prepared his chariots and went up to meet Israel his father in Goshen. He presented himself to him, fell on his neck, and wept on his neck a good while. Israel said to Joseph, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face and know that you are still alive." Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, "I will go up and tell Pharaoh, and will say to him, My brothers and my father's household who are in the land of Canaan have come to me, and the men are shepherds, for they have been keepers of livestock, and they have brought their flocks and their herds and all that they have. When Pharaoh calls you and says, What is your occupation? You shall say, Your servants have been keepers of livestock from our youth even until now, both we and our fathers, in order that you may dwell in the land of Goshen. For every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians."
Judah gets sent ahead to find the way so he can lead his father into Egypt. And this is fitting because Judah is the person that the messianic line, or who Jesus descends from, goes into Egypt to lead the way. And Judah, who is the person that carries on the birthright and the messianic line, goes to meet Joseph, who has been the Jesus-like person, who does the best at everything that he can, no matter what his situation. He doesn't complain about anything. So this is just perfect framing for a perfect reunion. Framing. Like, you know, picture frame? It's framed. That's what it means. There's a different type of frame. This frame is where we're building a frame around this picture. So, framing, another way of framing somebody is, I commit a crime and make it look like Paul did. That's, alright. Now here they are moving into the land of Goshen. This is fertile land in the very north of Egypt, around the Mediterranean Sea in this choice land. It's a very touching reunion where Jacob meets Joseph again and sees that he's alive. And they cry with each other because it's been over 20 years that Jacob has thought that Joseph was dead. Joseph is representative to Pharaoh, the same as Jesus is our mediator to God the Father. We can't get to God the Father without going through Jesus. Joseph being the second in power in Israel, nobody could get to the Pharaoh except through him. So here we have, it's like poetry, it repeats itself. When Joseph isn't there to be the Hebrews' representative to Pharaoh, slavery and abuse begins to the Israelite people, and they become slaves to sin. The same thing that when we live our lives without Jesus as our representative to God the Father, we are slaves to sin. We live in sin. The Egyptian society is agricultural. They live off of the floodwaters created by the Nile. They plant crops. It's about grain and their harvests. And to them, shepherding and livestock is looked down upon. Now, remember, I've said several times that shepherding is a very favorite occupation in the Bible. There are many, many famous shepherds and many, many stories about sheep. But to the Egyptians, they looked down on it. To them, it wasn't any good at all. To them, it was planting the harvest and harvesting the grain for the abundance of the Nile. Now, is there any historical evidence for ancient Hebrews in Egypt? Richard, I need you to do me a favor and hit the button. Now, once again, is there any historical evidence for ancient Hebrews in Egypt? The Egyptian government nowadays goes out of their way to make sure that no connection can be found with their land and ancient Israelites, because Egypt, modern Egypt, is in conflict with modern Israel, and the Egyptian government feels that it would give the government of Israel a claim to their lands, no matter how small it is. So they go out of their way to have everybody that goes in there to do any type of dig to not find any evidence that the ancient Israelites were there. In the land of Goshen in northern Egypt, around the 1800s BC, suddenly there was an archaeological dig, and they found a bunch of Canaanite-style homes. They're digging through layers of ground, and they suddenly found a bunch of Canaanite-style homes right there in Egypt. In and of itself, is this proof that the ancient Israelites were there? No, but it helps, right? Around that same time, right south of Goshen, there was an oasis land that is still there in Egypt called Fayum, that was expanded through a public works project. So they had a bunch of people build a project to expand this oasis in Fayum, and it took a Lake Moeris, which we were watching a video. I said we're going to talk about that later. What it did is it expanded this lake and made it bigger and turned it into a reservoir that they could use during dry times. Now, Fayum. All right. So here we have the Nile. Right here, it's using the Greek names. Here's that lake we're talking about, Moeris. Here they name it as Kirun, which is interesting because if they're using the Greek names, it wasn't called Kirun by the Greeks. The Greeks had a city called Crocodilopolis, city of crocodiles. And then this city right here, Hawara. But we'll get back to it. And also, what I wanted to point out is there's a bunch of waterways here that connect to the Nile. They're just called canal. Kind of interesting that they don't give those canals a name.
Turn to the movie theater.
This expanding the oasis of Fayum and turning Lake Moeris into a possible reservoir so they could have agriculture during droughts is not evidence of the Israelites being there. If we go back in the Egyptian historical record, we also don't find evidence of this great 7-year famine, because in the Bible here it tells us that the Egyptians were the one that supplied the globe with grain. They were the breadbasket of the world. Everybody lived because of them. But it's an archaeological testament to the structure that they needed to have this grain building infrastructure in place. This, once again, like I said, this isn't evidence of the Hebrews being in Egypt either, except remember I was pointing at that map of Fayum and I said, notice how all these canals don't have names on them? They're actually, one of those canals is actually named Bar Yusuf. And what's fascinating is Bar Yusuf, I'll show you a picture of it. It's a waterway that was built from the Nile to connect to this Lake Moeris to expand it so they could have more water to farm in drought and famine, possibly 7 years of famine. They built a canal called Bar Yusuf.
Turn to the movie theater.
Bar Yusuf is actually translated into the Canal of Joseph. It was an architectural project built in ancient Egypt to provide water during extreme famines, and it just happens to be called the Canal of Joseph. To me, that's pretty solid evidence that Joseph was there and that the Hebrews were there at the time when they should have been. The canal, which connected the oasis of Fayum and the reservoir at Lake Moeris, helped sustain ancient Egypt during a massive drought and famine. To me, I find this absolutely fascinating that there's history in the archaeological record that shows that the events of the Bible are completely possible. The pharaoh who authorized the Bar Yusuf was a pharaoh named Amenemhat. Amenemhat III. So we will now get a picture of him. And that is Amenemhat's sarcophagus.
That's the pharaoh.
He was the pharaoh that built the Canal of Joseph. So I think that whenever we're reading in the Bible about, they're talking about Joseph and then it talks about the pharaoh, I think this is the pharaoh that is talking about, even though the Bible doesn't name him. Amenemhat. Amenemhat. Now what's fascinating is he built a pyramid. But where did he build it? On the Hawara plain near the Bar Yusuf. And the Canal of Joseph we've talked about. So his pyramid, I will show you a picture of his pyramid. That right there, underneath that mud and dust, is the actual pyramid of this pharaoh, Amenemhat. And it's been, they took all the building blocks of this pyramid, the outer shell of it, and turned it into further archaeological architectural projects, and the sand and stuff built over it over time, but it's still there. You can go and see the pyramid of this Amenemhat, as long as you're not going there to try to prove that the Israelites were in Egypt. The Egyptian government doesn't like that.
Come to the movie theater.
That pyramid was built near this strange unnamed canal, which we know as the Canal of Joseph, on the plains of Hawara. So why would this Egyptian pharaoh build his ultimate monument on the plains of a canal made famous by an Israelite? Because that Israelite was the second in command and helped save Egypt and thus the Jewish people.
Come to the movie theater.
Wow, I've made Paul say.
Too many curtains. Thank you, Daddy.
It's damn boring.
Okay. So now that we've taken this little aside into history that places us in the time frame, and we met Pharaoh Amenemhat the third, and see that there's a canal to this day in Egypt named the Canal of Joseph, and this canal helped build a reservoir that helped sustain Egypt so that they could provide grain to the world during a giant famine. We'll move on to chapter 47 in the book of Genesis, verses 1 through 6. Nope, you want to listen to 47, 1 through 6.
Genesis 47. So Joseph went in and told Pharaoh, my father and my brothers with their flocks and herds and all that they have come from the land of Canaan. They are now in the land of Goshen. And from among his brothers he took 5 men and presented them to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to his brothers, what is your occupation? And they said to Pharaoh, your servants are shepherds, as our fathers were. They said to Pharaoh, we have come to sojourn in the land, for there is no pasture for your servants' flocks, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. Now, please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best of the land. Let them settle in the land of Goshen, and if you know any able men among them, put them in charge of my livestock.
Pharaoh, my family is all here. Joseph goes in and talks to Pharaoh Amenemhat III. I'm just speculating. I like to think it's Amenemhat III. A lot of evidence points there. So Joseph, although he's important, he still needs the Pharaoh's permission to move his family into the land of Goshen. We're all here, Pharaoh. Everybody's here. We brought everybody. Can we move here, please? And they picked 5 random brothers to speak for the whole family in front of Pharaoh. We're not sure which of the 5 brothers it is or why they're chosen because they're not named. Doesn't matter, I guess. Your servants are shepherds as our fathers were. And they go in there and they tell the Pharaoh, this is what we do. We're shepherds. Not heavy in the agriculture and farming. We're heavy into tending to our flocks and herds and goats and sheep and cows, and that's what we do. the agricultural-minded Egyptians looked down on the shepherding Israelites. We stated this at the end of the last chapter. And basically, what Joseph was telling him is, go in, tell Pharaoh what you do, that we're shepherds and we're not farmers, because we're not here to take away your jobs. We're here to fulfill a need. We just want to live. And they're allowed to settle. And now we will listen to verses 7 to 12 of chapter 47. Bless you. Maybe sneezing.
Then Joseph brought in Jacob his father, and stood him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, how many are the days of the years of your life? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, the days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their sojourning. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh, and went out from the presence of Pharaoh. Then Joseph settled his father and his brothers, and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his father's household with food, according to the number of their dependents.
Jacob goes in and blesses the Pharaoh, which I find to be fascinating and completely interesting. On two counts. One, the Egyptians were a prejudiced society that didn't like any outsiders, and they looked down on the Israelites for being outsiders and for being shepherds and not farmers. Also, it's interesting because pharaohs portray themselves as living gods. So the pharaoh would have been there as the representation of God Ra to the Egyptians. The Egyptians would have worshipped him as the sun god. And here he is allowing this outsider, who is not Egyptian, who is a shepherd nonetheless, to come in there and bless the god Pharaoh. It would have gone against everything that the Pharaoh believed was true. But yet he doesn't. And here we get an idea of how Jacob is. The days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. His sojourning is he's away from home. For most of his life, he's been running. He hasn't settled down much at all. Few and evil had been the days. He tricked his brother out of the birthright. His brother, who's that, Richard?
Esau.
Esau, yes. He ran away from Esau to get to Laban. He lost his son Joseph. They're not in their homeland right now. And of the three original patriarchs, Jacob is the youngest. Abraham lived to be 175 years old. Isaac lived to be 180. Here's Jacob bringing up the rear at 130. Now, he lives a few more years, but not as long as the other two. Isaac had died. And then we have this little piece here where it says that the Israelites are settled in the land of Ramesses. And this confuses scholars. Ramesses, depending on how you want to say that, what this does is it causes many to date these events and the entire Exodus wrong in history, to say it happened much later than it actually did. And what that does is there are a lot of scholars that try to say that the Exodus couldn't have happened because they're trying to find evidence of it in the wrong period of history. They're looking for it 800 years after it actually happened. Of course, there's no evidence of it happening then. But they look and they see all this evidence of it happening earlier, but it can't have been it because right here it says they settled in Ramses. So what's happening? There were a bunch of later pharaohs named Ramses. There might have been 6 of them. Pharaoh Ramses II was called the Great. And he came 600 or so years after the events of Joseph. But this Pharaoh Ramses is not connected to Pharaoh Amenemhat at all. Now, if I were to tell you to get on a boat and sail from Lynchville to Fort Steuben to Fort Orange down to Amsterdam in our modern day context, and I told you they were right here in this county, it would probably confuse you, wouldn't it? Now, what's interesting is Lynchville is the old name of Rome. Fort Steuben is the old name of Utica. Fort Orange is the old name of Albany. And New Amsterdam is the old name of New York City. What I did is, in order to talk to my modern audience, I inserted new names, even though I'm talking about old places. So when the text here is talking about the land of Ramses, it's so that the people who are reading this later on know what is being talked about some 600 years before. So they call it the land of Ramses because that's what it would have been called later on when they had built the temple in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem had become a kingdom. But this was in the time of King David. It was several hundred years after these events that actually happened. So the names of the cities weren't Goshen and Avaris, they were the land of Ramses. So what modern scholars do is they look and go, whoa, they talk about the land of Ramses, and they try to find evidence for everything that happened 600 or so years after it actually happened. That would be like me telling you to drive to Fort Bend and go see the Aud. Fort Bend is Utica. Okay? Or we could go down to Amsterdam, but you would most commonly know it as New York. And you and I go to Fort Orange all the time for your dentist appointments, even though it's Albany. So there you have it. That's what's happening here. It shouldn't confuse scholars as much as it does, but it does. It's edited later for these modern readers. In the ancient times, it would have been called Avaris in the land of Goshen. But for some reason here, they call it the land of Ramses, so that the modern readers will know where it is.
Last 13.
We'll listen to verses 13 through 19 of chapter 47. Through 19, verses 13 through 19 of chapter 47.
Now there was no food in all the land, for the famine was very severe, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished by reason of the famine. And Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan in exchange for the grain that they bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. And when the money was all spent in the land of Egypt, in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us food. Why should we die before your eyes? For our money is gone." And Joseph answered, "Give your livestock and I will give you food in exchange for your livestock, if your money is gone. So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food in exchange for the horses, the flocks, the herds, and the donkeys. He supplied them with food in exchange for all their livestock that year. And when that year was ended, they came to him the following year and said to him, "We will not hide from my lord that our money is all spent. The herds of livestock are my lord's. There is nothing left in sight of my lord but our bodies and our land. Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for food, and we with our land will be servants to Pharaoh. And give us seed that we may live and not die, and that the land may not be desolate."
For the famine was very severe. This must have been later on in years in the famine. Of the 7-year famine, probably the year 3 or 4. So for the entire time, Joseph has been taking the grain that they had been storing because of the reservoir at Lake Moeris by the canal of Joseph, and he's been selling the grain back for money. So Joseph brings the money to Pharaoh, and it shows that he's a trustworthy person. So sit, Paul, please say everything because you're touching the microphone with the water bottle. All right. What? I know, we're having a bad internet connection. The Egyptian people's money is gone. So Joseph comes up with the idea to get them to pay in their cattle and their livestock. And what this does is the government owns the items of these people. So now they're selling their livestock back to the pharaohs. Soon, all the livestock is government owned, and they ran out of that to sell back. What happens next? Well, listen, verses 20 through 26. Why are you doing this to me? Why is my internet connection so bad? Do you have to do this right now?
Apparently, yes.
Okay. Let's see. Verses. All right, so we're listening to verses 20 to 26.
So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. For all the Egyptians sold their fields because the famine was severe on them. The land became Pharaoh's. As for the people, he made servants of them from one end of Egypt to the other. Only the land of the priests he did not buy, for the priests had a fixed allowance from Pharaoh and lived on the allowance that Pharaoh gave them. Therefore they did not sell their land. And Joseph said to the people, "Behold, I have this day bought you and your land for Pharaoh, seed for you, and you shall sow the land. And at the harvest you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh, and 4/5 shall be your own, as seed for the field, and as food for yourselves and your households, and as food for your sons." And they said, "You have saved our lives. May it please my Lord, we will be servants to Pharaoh." Joseph made a statute concerning the land of Egypt, and stands to this day, that Pharaoh should have the fifth. The land of the priests alone did not become Pharaoh's.
Joseph bought all of the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. Here we have Pharaoh all the livestock, and now he owns all the land. 1/5 of all the harvest belongs to Pharaoh, and this is taxes. So what happens is you work his land and pay him for it. He even owns the livestock.
Get trash.
And what's well, anyway, this sounds like